Hey everyone, we're just doing a quick after action report on Cloud Field Day, Day 1, Cloud Field Day 15. I am Nathan Bennett. Find me on Twitter as VNathanBennett, and I am with
Eric Wright, easy to find online. I'm at Disco Posse on Twitter, and if you just want to search LinkedIn, any other social network, you can find me, Disco Posse. And I also am a host of the Disco Posse podcast. I feel like I'm saying that a lot. Go to youtube.com/Disco Posse podcast, and it'll be great to chat with some folks.
Fantastic. So we're just basically going through kind of with the different solutions that we saw that were out there. Today we got to hear from Proximo. I hope I'm saying that correct. We got to hear from Google Cloud on the storage areas.
Yep.
And then we got to hear from Kintiq at the end. So let's start with Proximo. What did you think about the different solutions that they saw?
Yeah, Proximo looks like they're very interesting. It's a neat space. It's always funny when you look at anything, when you use the word observability in it. It gets interesting when we talk about multi-cloud.
Yep.
They're hard words to use and seem meaningful,
Yeah.
but they showed some really good use cases, and I was
Yeah.
pretty happy with that. They seemed like they were well versed in it. They had some good history, I think, with the field day crew.
Yeah.
So I think they did a good job. Yeah, technology-wise, I'm excited about what they've got coming up. We'll see how it all plays out. We got to dive in, not as deep as we wanted, but.
So what's interesting to me with Proximo is when they were here last year, it was basically about how you can build your cloud environment based off of best practices. And now they came back and they're like, no, now we're going to connect like an AWS environment to an Azure environment. We're going to orchestrate that for you. We're going to do that by deploying our solution on a Kubernetes, self-service model deployment. That's probably, they mentioned single click, which to me screams marketplace.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm assuming they're going to do it. And I thought all that stuff was really good on top of the fact, Terraform integration and Swagger integration for their API. I thought those are all kind of like table stakes. Moving from that into where they go next is really interesting for Proximo. What did you think that they did that was kind of like, I'm not quite sure where you're going with this?
Yeah, it was more finding the active customer that's going to really leverage it. I was glad when they talked about multi-cloud, they didn't talk about the single app that runs on multiple clouds, because that's just such a unicorn story.
Yes.
And we know that's not true unless you're Netflix, LinkedIn, there are use cases like that. They definitely solved the orchestration of networking problem. Like I said, they mentioned Terraform.
Yep.
So I like that they're using what effectively is the industry standard for multi-cloud orchestration.
Yeah.
And they're solving problems that Terraform itself doesn't solve, which is tricky because Terraform are also getting into the game of multi-cloud network orchestration, and they're creating their cloud services. So it is a bit of a muddy water, but I think what Proximo can do well is kind of look at the space they've already been successful in telling their story and evolve that story with them. And there's a lot to be learned, still more, and the presentations I think were well worth going back and revisit for sure. And,
yeah, definitely. One thing I will say to our viewers is once these recordings are out in the wild, be sure to put those in the description so that they can be brought up. This is just us saying, what we thought from the things that we saw. I think from my perspective, Proximo has a lot of upward growth that they can definitely move into. They mentioned that they could, connect all these orchestration solutions into like a CI/CD pipeline. I would have loved to have seen that. I would have loved to have seen, how they were able to deploy an entire connection between like AWS and Azure through a CI/CD pipeline, and then maintained it via a webhook. Like that would have been fantastic.
I think this is always the oddity of presenting to Field Day, where I held them up high a lot longer than maybe some people like, because I want to get to the problem they solve and does it resonate in customer language, because that's kind of like the world that I think in. And I think they did a decent job there. Agree with you. I think we saw enough that they've sort of proven they can do it. But it was, for me, the important thing was, is there really a case for, because they talked about tying in with service mesh. And it was funny, the first one they mentioned was Consul.
Yeah.
which tells me they're coming from a different side of the service mesh space versus most people would say Istio. They're going to
exactly.
say, they're going to talk about different, they're going to talk about Envoy proxies, they're going to talk about different worlds. So when they say service mesh, they're clearly coming from the enterprise view
Yep.
where console is a decently strong player.
Very strong. Yep.
And but then they also talked about the fact that they're not replacing it, which was neat. We didn't get to dive into that story and see like what's the life of a packet across, and that actually would have been neat. Like show the deployment, and then like let's see the life cycle of a packet as it makes its way from cloud to cloud, and what happens if we like cut the line. So there you go. You were right to your point. We should have done the deployment. Then said, now let's see why we had to do it this way.
Yeah, that's one of the run-on gag of today. It just seemed like what we would have liked to have seen first was very much at the end of a lot of the things that we saw. Another thing that moving into the next area, well, within Google Cloud, I really think that what they were showing, and I apologize if you're
I'm gonna love the post-production you have to do to try and get that airplane out of there.
That was a very loud plane going over. But one of the things that is interesting about Google Cloud that they showed me, I really liked, and this is really silly, but I really liked that quirky demo about doing a cat of a file, and in the file saying hello from this region, and on the other side saying hello from this region, and then showing that replication and how fast it was. There are a couple of snark from some of the storage folks that know storage a little bit better, saying, okay, well, I could do this with storage, but I think we always need to remember about, like, cloud isn't here to show, exactly that, if you had the best storage and the best stuff and you were well architected and knew what you were doing, you could still build something that is the cloud. You would just have to spend the time to build it. Whereas I now, who know nothing about storage, can do the exact same thing in like 3 clicks, right? That's kind of the difference of what they're bringing. And kicking it off from there, that was really cool. And then I think they also showed some Kubernetes backups as well as some other solutions, including was it automatic tiering?
The automatic tiering, yeah. What was interesting was, again, the audience view that we have when they talk about backup, there's such a fundamental understanding of what backup means. It's kind of like we started yesterday with, like, let's define cloud. Like you have to really begin there. When you talk about objective truth, you have to say, well, what is truth? So for us, when we say what is backup, it was really like, so Jim and Gina and Ray and some of the folks, they talked about backup in the sense of like, I want to back up a file server, and how do I restore it, or back up an application server with a 3-tiered application. Like that's not the pattern that you use in Kubernetes. And so it was funny that I sort of tried to come at it from the other angle of a stateful Kubernetes app which breaks some of the patterns. However, what are the adjacencies? And you can definitely tell when people start to talk about Kubernetes, it's easy to get out of your element. In the same way that if I were to talk to Ray Lucchesi, he's a fantastic human on the storage side, he's forgotten more about storage than I'm ever going to know. He's an incredible guy and has such a deep, rich history in research and deployments. But so when he asks a question and says like, well, this can't be possible, because his context is enterprise rack and stack storage in my data center. There's no way that I can have 3 tiers in my data center, because we would think it would cost $1 million. But Google spent billions on their infrastructure. So
absolutely,
I was impressed by what they were doing. I do have a little bit of skepticism when you say it's like time to first byte is the same across all tiers. I'm like, okay, if you say you can do it and it's pointers, like, well, maybe I'll call Bravo Sierra on some of it, but
well, I think we are a little burned from AWS and Azure's perspective on storage. That when Google comes around and they're like, no, it's the same speed to first byte, like that's a lot of people are like, oh, well, you can't do that. Well, no, you can. It's pretty easy. You just bill it differently. And so, like, you can. Time to first byte is the same, but now if you put everything in archive, but you're retrieving it at a high rate, Well, guess what? Then you shouldn't be an archive, number one. And number two, you're going to die from, or not die, but you're going to get billed like in insane amount from retrieval costs,
Right.
because you're retrieving it so many different times. And just to clarify, AutoClass was the tiering solution that they showed, where basically if you don't know if it's cold line, nearline, or archive, or what type of storage it needs to go into, just put it into AutoClass and it'll automatically move it from one place to the other based off of your retrieval. So if it goes all the way down to an archive and I start retrieving it more than I should, it'll move it up and say, okay, we're going to save you money because you're retrieving it a little bit more than you should. So, I think that was a really good thing. And with some of their competitors in that space, with automatic intelligent tiering, from AWS, that's definitely something that they need to move into.
Yeah, and there's, again, I think we also got hung up in a weird way on the object versus block
Yeah.
storage system, and not sure whether it was just because of we jumped into Kubernetes and then we went back to object storage, and there was a lot of things, so that it created confusion. We talked about the backup and restore. Well, how can you write to a container through the CSI to an object? Well, you can't. And they're like, but you just talked about backing up. Well, no, we back a block system to an object file.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you watch the video, you'll see there's a little bit of loss of connection on block versus object there. And again, we look at, we're used to big old servers with shark fins on top.
Exactly.
and big blue logos.
Yeah, and it gets under our fingernails, and our fingernails bleed from trying to get the little rails in and all that horrible stuff. But what is it? The little rail nuts.
Those, I can feel the pain right now under my nail.
And that's all I had to say, and then it's like, oh yes, it hurts so badly.
Visceral reaction.
So I think when we talk about Kubernetes, we need to remember that Kubernetes is an ecosystem outside of wherever it's built, right? So if I build a Kubernetes cluster in vSphere, that Kubernetes cluster has no idea of any of this stuff outside of it, right?
Correct.
Until I give it some sort of insight into it. Now, there's a lot of caveats to that and whatever, but from a base generality, I think that's a good thing to keep in mind when we're talking about Kubernetes. So let's hop over into Kintig. Now, I'm going to be a little bit quieter on this one because I am not a networking guy, but what they showed was impressive from a very wide-arching scope of what they can do. But I'm going to pass over to you. Say, what'd you see from Kintig? Can you give us a quick rundown of them, and what'd you think?
Yeah, this is like going in my own backyard. Having come from network and enterprise prior to me being back on the independent circuit, I was working with Sev1, which is a large, very similarly targeted platform and I actually helped to architect this massive time series database platform architecture that runs in SaaS. So I was overly familiar with the problem they're solving, both for the client as well as in their own architecture. So I was impressed by, as we got to where they needed to be able to share their story, the problem that I think they faced was that we weren't ready for the cloud story, and they were missing some interesting pieces. If they wanted to go towards application and they want to go towards cloud management, they were still so tightly bound to the network visualization, which is fantastic and an incredibly complex problem. The difficulty I think they will find is that first move into the cloud ops environment is they're going to say, this is 4% of where I spend my day is in networking. And that's why you'll see kind of in the demo we tried to move them towards, and they did a great job at the end when they got to some neat stuff. Because we asked a lot. I asked a lot of questions.
Again, it was at the end, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. It was like that one more thing. Like, oh, by the way, we've launched a new phone. I'm like, really, Steve Jobs? This is what that. The last screen on there was like, whoa, hold on a second. You buried the lead. If you had opened with this, we'd have been hung on this all day. The what if scenario for network connectivity. That was the thing. What is the purpose of observability? Is to be able to ask a question of a system
Yeah.
which can be inferred from a set of inputs. It comes from physical engineering, right? And that idea didn't get necessarily played out as well as it could have.
Yeah.
But they did a great job, and the platform's very interesting, and they're eager to move the platform to where it needs to be to
Yeah.
solve the problem for customers. So I'm long Kentic, I'll say, because I think they're eager, hungry, and they've got a good base that
Yeah.
they can develop from. So I think they've got a good opportunity ahead.
Yeah, they got a great growth opportunity for where they can go, because when we think about these products, we always think about it like from the application and then going out into the infrastructure, but they actually went the opposite direction, where they're like, we're starting at, the infrastructure, maybe even a little bit above it, and then we're going back. And, a lot of people kind of immediately are like, well, what does this do? And then you think about, oh, well, if there's an outage for a main provider that works across, the globe, they're really going to want to have some sort of solution that tells them what's going on and what's wrong in the actual internet itself.
Right.
That's something that we always take for granted. But we've seen it before with like the Cloudflare outage, when all of a sudden, you couldn't get to Disney Plus or any of those type of networks that depended on that solution, right? And so Kentic is really interesting because it started there and now it's moving back in. Did I kind of hit that close to the mark?
I think so. And really, like there's data that's at the network, and I was happy they didn't say edge once, which is so cool, because it's very tempting to move. So like we can get everything at the edge. They really hit this idea that they want to move into cloud networking, and they started to dabble, and they were very transparent that our Kubernetes story is not fully formed yet, but you could tell they were leaning, and I think that's where they'll go. As a company, it's going to be interesting because it's tough to move into a new market with a completely new buyer and user. But the visualization stuff was really slick.
Very good. Yeah.
I think the query response times were really good. Knowing what's behind it, we get teased by, like, if you just open New Relic and you go sweep, ding, and it redraws in 0.3 seconds, because there's a disturbing amount of stuff that's getting cached. They've got a sort of stock set of views they always present. To be able to drill through an ecosystem using query language in Graph, and then get a visualization, and then change the time scale. That's actually why I asked them to do that, and watch the redraw. The math that's happening behind it is incredible. So the good news is they're probably still going to continue to sell to the ops infrastructure audience, which are not in AppDynamics, New Relic world, where it's like, I want sub-second response. Interesting stuff. And like I said, the tech is more fantastic than people realize. And that's kind of sad, because I know what it took to make that thing. You're like, it's like when you see someone's beautiful hardwood floor and you're like, oh, that's really nice. And they're like, no, seriously, look at it. And you want to like mush their face into it. Go, look at these miter cuts I had to do. You have no idea these are two 33.3 degree miter cuts, because there's a 45 above it, and I had to have a special pin corner that had to match.
You've done flooring, and I'm laughing because I have also done flooring, and I absolutely understand. So if we could, those were all of the vendors that we got to see today, and if we could finish off with kind of like the highlight that we saw across all of the vendors, I'll start so you can kind of think of one or two. For me, I can think of like two different things. One of them was definitely the Proximo's slide, where we didn't have to ask them, do you have Terraform or infrastructure as code solution or an API? They basically just told us, I think it was like the third slide that they had was like, look, you're going to ask us this question. It's here. We have a Terraform provider. We have an open API. We use Swagger, so you can absolutely use that stuff. That was great. That was fantastic. The other thing that I really appreciated today, which is kind of a pet peeve, but the Kentic speaker saying that AI is kind of more of a marketing term, and I don't like saying that we use AI, but we do use AI, but we don't like to really push it that far. That was that was refreshing because it just kind of brought us back into, oh, okay, so let's talk about what is real and what these real things are instead of these buzzwords that we throw around so much.
Yeah, we call it AI washing, right? Where you just say like powered by AI. Everything's powered by AI, but it really is actually like if then else.
Yeah.
So yeah, fantastic. My super surprise of the day, and one that I was happily surprised by, because they killed Reader, but they listened to the enterprise. Google jumped out in that they told a story and they showed a platform evolution that I would not have said they would have achieved 2 years ago, because they were clearly listening to a very strong enterprise customer story that looked like an on-premises enterprise data center problem that they were solving in the cloud, that for years we said, this is not a problem we want to solve, you should change the way you build and deploy your applications. So kudos to the folks at Google for really finally moving towards, and I think they actually leapfrogged where some of the other major North American centric cloud providers are. Obviously it's not hard to guess who the other two are.
Yeah.
But I had strong doubts about Google's viability for enterprise cloud computing, except through discount management, right? Like draw people in, and they can do that. It's not that it isn't amazing technology. They're an incredible team of people.
Yeah.
But it really felt for a long time like you're doing computing wrong if you're using cloud and not getting the most out of it.
Yeah.
So they listened. That looked like what you would ship in a rack in a dream story from any of the major storage providers, and the fact that they're going to do this at scale.
Yep.
So yeah, I was really happily surprised by it. They did a great presentation, answered a lot of tough questions. Everybody did a fantastic job. We had a very interesting day, off camera, which was an interesting and it was a
through it though.
a really wild experience. Always what we do at Cloud Field Day or any of these field day events is so.
Yeah, it's about the delegates as well and everyone, and trying to take care of all the things that happen. So I think going back to your statement of just a dream story of that, can't finish better than that. So, Eric, appreciate you joining me, and it's Disco Posse.
Disco Posse, and yeah, and go to gtmdelta.com, my new startup. So I got to get better at leading with that. I've literally only been doing it for 2 months, so you think I'd be more used to it by now. I've just spent my whole last 2 years learning how to say smash that like button. Don't forget to hit subscribe. But yeah, no, thank you very much, Nathan. It's a real pleasure to share some camera time with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And be sure to check out Tech Field Day tomorrow. This is just day one. We'll be here for the rest of the week. Thanks for joining us.